Lewis Thompson wasn't just a CEO, he was a visionary with a purpose. As the founder of Golden Brew, one of the fastest-growing coffee chains in the country, he built his company on a foundation of equality, inclusivity, and excellent service. From the very beginning, Lewis wanted Golden Brew to be more than just a place to grab a cup of coffee. He wanted it to be a welcoming space for everyone, no matter their background. His mission was simple yet powerful: treat every customer with respect and provide opportunities for employees to grow, regardless of race, gender, or social status. He believed that a company's true success wasn't just measured by profit, but by the values it upheld. Employees were trained not only in customer service, but also in diversity and inclusivity, ensuring that every store reflected the warmth and fairness that Golden Brew stood for. However, as the company expanded, Lewis began to wonder, were his employees truly living up to these values? Were customers being treated with the same level of respect he envisioned? To find out, he decided to step into their world, not as a CEO, but as an ordinary customer. What he would soon discover would shake the very foundation of his beliefs and put his leadership to the ultimate test. Lewis Thompson had always believed in leading by example, and there was no better way to test his company's values than by experiencing Golden Brew as an ordinary customer. He had built the business on fairness, inclusivity, and respect, but were his employees upholding those principles when no one was watching? There was only one way to find out. Ditching his usual tailored suits for a casual hoodie and jeans, Lewis transformed into just another customer. He chose one of Golden Brew's busiest city branches, where he had received mixed reports about the quality of service. As he stepped inside, the familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and customers engaged in casual conversation. The atmosphere seemed lively, but it didn't take long for him to notice something troubling. A blonde barista, whose name tag read Karen, stood behind the counter. But unlike the other employees rushing to serve customers, she was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging the growing line. Lewis approached the counter, flashing a polite smile. "Excuse me, could I get some help, please?" he asked, his voice warm and patient. Karen barely looked up, letting out a dramatic sigh. "I'm busy." "Go wait like everyone else," she muttered before returning to her phone. Lewis blinked, momentarily stunned by her blatant rudeness. But instead of reacting, he stepped back into line, choosing to observe her behavior further. What he saw made his stomach turn. Karen greeted white customers with a smile, engaging in friendly small talk as she took their orders. But when customers of color approached, her demeanor shifted. She became cold, dismissive, and rushed through their orders with no effort at courtesy. It was a pattern, one that was impossible to ignore. When Lewis finally reached the counter again, he decided to test her. "I'd like a medium latte, please," he said, his tone still friendly but firm. Karen barely glanced up. "We're out of that," she said flatly. Lewis frowned. Just moments ago, he had seen her serve the exact same drink to a white customer. "Are you sure?" he asked. Karen crossed her arms and gave him a sharp look. "Try another store," she snapped. The room fell silent. Other customers, now aware of what was happening, exchanged uneasy glances. Lewis felt a mix of disappointment and disbelief. If this was how she treated people every day, how many customers had left feeling disrespected and unwelcome? Without another word, Lewis nodded and walked out. He had seen enough. But this wasn't over. Golden Brew stood for something greater, and he was about to prove it. As Lewis Thompson stood in line at his own coffee shop, observing the way customers were treated, a troubling pattern emerged. He had built Golden Brew on the principles of equality, respect, and excellent service, but the reality inside this store told a different story. The way Karen, the barista behind the counter, interacted with customers was deeply unsettling. Karen welcomed white customers with enthusiasm, smiling warmly and engaging in polite conversation as she took their orders. She moved efficiently, ensuring they received exactly what they asked for, often offering additional suggestions or personal recommendations. She seemed to thrive in her role, at least when serving certain people. But the moment a customer of color stepped up to the counter, everything changed. Her demeanor turned cold and dismissive. She rushed through their orders with minimal effort, barely making eye contact. If a Black or Hispanic customer asked a question, her responses were short and impatient, as if she couldn't be bothered. And if someone hesitated for even a second, trying to decide on their order, she sighed loudly, rolling her eyes as if their presence was an inconvenience. Louis, still disguised in his casual hoodie and jeans, patiently waited his turn, determined to experience firsthand how she would treat him. When he reached the front, he gave a warm, polite greeting. "Hi, I'd like a medium latte, please." Karen didn't even glance up from the counter. "We're out of that," she replied, her tone flat and dismissive. Louis raised an eyebrow. He had just seen her make the exact same drink for a white customer moments earlier. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen finally looked up, her expression sharp. "Try another store," she snapped before immediately turning her attention to the next person in line. A heavy silence fell over the shop. Nearby customers, now aware of the blatant discrimination, exchanged uneasy glances. Some lowered their heads, pretending not to notice. Others looked visibly uncomfortable but said nothing. The room had changed, the air thick with tension. Louis, a man who had spent years building a business rooted in inclusivity, felt an overwhelming mix of disappointment and anger. How many times had this happened before? How many customers had walked away feeling humiliated and unwelcomed simply because of their race? He didn't need to confront Karen at that moment. Instead, he nodded, turned, and walked out. He had all the proof he needed, and now it was time to take action. Golden Brew would not stand for this. Leaving the store that day, Louis Thompson felt a mix of disappointment and determination. He had spent years building Golden Brew into a coffee chain that stood for inclusivity, fairness, and exceptional service. But what he witnessed firsthand, blatant discrimination by an employee, was a direct betrayal of everything his company represented. He knew he couldn't let this slide. Back at Golden Brew headquarters, Louis wasted no time. He pulled up customer feedback and employee reports from the store he had visited, searching for any prior complaints. What he found only deepened his frustration. There were multiple reports of rude behavior from Karen. Several customers had noted that she treated people of color differently, being cold and dismissive to some while warmly engaging with others. Some even suspected they had been given incorrect orders on purpose. The patterns were clear, and Louis knew that his experience wasn't an isolated incident. More concerning, however, was the lack of action from the store's management. Louis noticed that while complaints had been made, none had been formally addressed. The store manager, Jessica, had failed to report any incidents or take disciplinary action. It was a red flag. Either she hadn't taken the concern seriously, or she had been too afraid to confront the issue. Determined to get to the root of the problem, Louis called Jessica in for a private meeting. At first, Jessica seemed nervous. She knew why she was there. When Louis asked about Karen's behavior, she hesitated before finally admitting what he already suspected. "I've noticed her attitude toward certain customers," Jessica confessed. "But I didn't want to cause any problems." Her voice was uncertain, but Louis pressed on. "What kind of problems?" Jessica sighed, shifting in her chair. "Karen is popular with some of the other staff. If I reported her, I worried it would create tension in the workplace. I thought if I ignored it, maybe it would stop on its own. Lewis shook his head. Avoiding conflict had only made things worse. Allowing this kind of behavior to continue wasn't just unprofessional, it was damaging to the company's reputation and values. Jessica, he said, creating a positive, inclusive work environment isn't just a suggestion, it's a responsibility. Leadership means making the tough calls, even when they're uncomfortable. Jessica nodded, her expression a mix of relief and regret. You're right. I should have done more. With her cooperation, Lewis laid out a plan. They would address the issue immediately, ensuring that Golden Brew upheld its mission of fairness and respect. But this wasn't just about one store. Lewis was about to take action that would impact every Golden Brew location. This was no longer just an internal problem. It was time to set an example. A week after his undercover visit, Lewis Thompson returned to the Golden Brew location, but this time he wasn't alone. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, he entered the store with a small team of executives. The usual lively buzz of customers chatting and baristas working quickly faltered the moment the employees recognized him. Conversations hushed, and a ripple of unease spread through the room. At the counter, Karen, oblivious to what was coming, was leaning lazily against the register, scrolling through her phone again. She barely acknowledged Lewis and his team until she heard his voice. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" Lewis spoke firmly, his voice carrying authority. The staff slowly gathered near the seating area, exchanging nervous glances. Karen finally looked up, her expression shifting from indifference to shock. She quickly tucked her phone into her pocket, her usual confidence disappearing as she recognized the man she had dismissed just days before. "My name is Lewis Thompson," he began, his gaze sweeping across the staff. "I am the CEO of Golden Brew." Gasps rippled through the room. Karen froze, her face draining of color. Some employees exchanged anxious looks, realizing that this was not a routine visit. "Last week, I visited this store undercover," Lewis continued. "I wanted to see for myself how our customers are treated." He let his words sink in before shifting his focus. "What I experienced was unacceptable." Karen's hands clenched into fists at her sides as Lewis locked eyes with her. "I was ignored, dismissed, and lied to. And based on customer complaints, I know I am not the only one." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Lewis raised a hand, silencing her. "It doesn't matter that I'm the CEO," he stated. "Because this isn't about me. It's about how every customer, no matter their background, should be treated with the same respect and courtesy. And that did not happen here." The tension in the room was thick. Karen shuffled her feet uncomfortably, clearly struggling to find a way out of this. I didn't know it was you," she stammered weakly. Lewis shook his head. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with decency." Karen's usual bravado had vanished. The store manager, Jessica, stood nearby, watching the scene unfold, her expression tense. Lewis turned his attention to her. "Jessica," he said, "leadership means making difficult choices. I understand why you hesitated, but allowing this behavior to continue was not an option." Jessica nodded, looking remorseful but grateful for the second chance. Golden Brew was built on the belief that every customer matters. And I intend to make sure that belief is honored in every store we own. As Karen sat in stunned silence, Lewis knew the time had come to take action. This wasn't just about one employee, it was about setting a standard for the entire company. The room was thick with tension as Lewis Thompson stood before his employees, his gaze firm yet composed. The weight of his words still lingered in the air, but now it was time for action. All eyes were on him, waiting to see what would happen next. Turning his attention back to Karen, Lewis spoke with unwavering authority. Karen, your behavior last week, along with the complaints I've reviewed, show a clear pattern of disrespect and discrimination. That is unacceptable, and I cannot allow it to continue." Karen's face went pale. Her mouth opened slightly as if to protest, but no words came out. The once confident employee, who had dismissed customers and treated them unfairly, was now visibly shaken. "Wait," she finally blurted out. "I can change. It won't happen again, I swear." Lewis, his expression unreadable, let the silence stretch before responding. "Karen, you had the opportunity to do the right thing with every customer you served. You chose not to." The reality of the moment settled on her like a heavy weight. She glanced around, hoping for support from her coworkers, but no one spoke. Some looked away, while others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to defend her actions. Effective immediately, Lewis continued, "You are no longer employed at Golden Brew." A stunned gasp rippled through the store. Karen's face turned red, her hands shaking slightly. "But," she started, her voice rising in desperation. Lewis raised a hand, cutting her off. "This isn't about punishment, it's about accountability." Karen's eyes darted to Jessica, the store manager, as if looking for help, but Jessica only stood still, her expression firm. She understood now, avoiding conflict had only allowed the problem to fester. "I wish you the best in the future," Lewis said finally, his tone leaving no room for argument. "But this company cannot afford employees who don't align with our values." Karen swallowed hard, her shoulders slumping as she realized there was no way out of this. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the back of the store, disappearing from sight. As the tension in the room slowly eased, Lewis turned to Jessica and the remaining staff. "Jessica," he said, "I understand the challenges you've faced. But as a leader, it is your responsibility to ensure that this workplace reflects our values." Jessica nodded, her face a mixture of relief and determination. Lewis continued, addressing the entire team. "Golden Brew is built on respect, inclusivity, and fairness. That will not change. Today is the start of a new chapter." He then announced a company-wide change, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees. The room was quiet, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was understanding. Word of Karen's termination spread quickly, and soon, the internet caught wind of what had happened. But instead of controversy, Golden Brew was praised for taking swift and decisive action. Customers began to see the change immediately, and the atmosphere in the store improved. For Lewis, this wasn't just about firing an employee. It was about setting a precedent, ensuring that the company he built remained true to its mission. And today, he had done just that. As Karen walked out of the store for the last time, the tension in the room slowly gave way to a quieter, more reflective atmosphere. Lewis Thompson turned his attention to the remaining employees, his expression firm but not unkind. This moment wasn't just about removing a problematic employee, it was about ensuring the company's values were upheld and making real, lasting changes. His gaze settled on Jessica, the store manager, who stood uncertainly, shifting from foot to foot. She had allowed Karen's behavior to continue unchecked, not out of malice, but out of fear of disrupting the workplace. But Lewis knew that true leadership required strength, accountability, and the courage to take action, even when it was difficult. "Jessica," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "I understand that managing a team is not always easy. But leadership is about ensuring that every employee upholds our values. Moving forward, I need you to take that responsibility seriously." Jessica nodded quickly, her expression filled with both determination and relief. "I will," she promised. Lewis offered her more than just words, he offered support. He announced that Golden Brew would be implementing leadership training for all store managers, equipping them with the skills needed to handle workplace issues effectively and foster a more positive and inclusive work environment. Jessica would not be left to figure things out alone. She would receive the guidance she needed to become a stronger leader. But Lewis wasn't stopping there. Effective immediately, he continued, every employee in every Golden Brew location will undergo mandatory diversity and inclusion training. A murmur ran through the gathered staff, a mix of surprise and understanding. This isn't about punishment, Lewis clarified, it's about ensuring that every single person who walks through our doors feels respected and valued. The training would cover unconscious bias, customer service best practices, and the importance of inclusivity in the workplace. Employees would learn how their actions, whether intentional or not, could impact customers and the business as a whole. But beyond training, Lewis knew that true change required ongoing effort. He announced that Golden Brew would implement a new anonymous feedback system, allowing employees and customers to report any concerns about service, discrimination, or workplace behavior without fear of retaliation. The reaction was immediate. Employees who had once felt powerless now had a voice. Jessica, once hesitant, now stood taller, knowing she had the tools and support to succeed. Golden Brew was no longer just a company, it was a symbol of progress, fairness, and accountability. And Lewis had ensured that his vision for equality wasn't just words, but action. Word of Lewis Thompson's decisive action spread like wildfire. Within hours of the incident at Golden Brew, customers who had witnessed the confrontation began sharing their experiences on social media. Videos, photos, and first-hand accounts of Lewis exposing Karen's discriminatory behavior quickly gained traction, sparking thousands of reactions and comments. Finally, a CEO who stands by his values, one user wrote on Twitter, their post receiving thousands of likes and shares. Others chimed in, applauding Lewis for taking immediate action against workplace discrimination. The hashtag Golden Brew Justice began trending, with people from across the country sharing their own experiences, both good and bad, about inclusivity in businesses. News outlets quickly picked up the story. Local and national media highlighted how Lewis, a black CEO, had gone undercover to personally investigate the treatment of customers in his stores. Major news networks invited him for interviews, where he spoke about the importance of diversity, accountability, and strong leadership in the business world. While the media buzz brought positive attention to Golden Brew, it also led to intense scrutiny. People questioned whether this was an isolated incident or a deeper, more systemic issue within the company. Lewis knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to prove that his company was committed to long-term change. Golden Brew responded swiftly. They issued a formal statement reaffirming their zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and announced company-wide diversity and inclusion training. The company also launched an internal review of hiring and training policies, ensuring that employees not only understood the company's values but lived by them in their daily interactions. Customers responded overwhelmingly in favor of the changes. Many who had previously felt unwelcome at Golden Brew locations returned, eager to support a company that was actively working to make a difference. Sales at the store where the incident took place surged, as both longtime patrons and new customers came in to show their support. Investors and business leaders took notice, too. Other companies reached out to Lewis, asking for advice on how to foster more inclusive work environments. The incident, though initially damaging, ultimately strengthened Golden Brew's reputation as a business that not only talked about values but enforced them. Lewis knew this wasn't just about one store or one employee. It was about changing the culture of business itself, one cup of coffee, one act of accountability at a time. As the days passed, the impact of Lewis Thompson's bold actions extended far beyond the walls of that single Golden Brew store. The confrontation with Karen, the sweeping policy changes, and the nationwide attention had sparked something bigger than Lewis had imagined. This wasn't just about coffee anymore, it was about the kind of world people wanted to live in. The Golden Brew brand, once just another successful coffee chain, became a symbol of inclusivity, fairness, and accountability. Customers, employees, and even leaders in other industries took note. Businesses across the country began reassessing their own policies, wondering if their employees truly upheld the values they claimed to stand for. The ripple effect was undeniable. One afternoon, while visiting another Golden Brew location, Lewis was greeted by a young barista who recognized him immediately. The barista's eyes lit up with admiration. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to say thank you," he said. "Because of what you did, I finally feel proud to work here." Lewis smiled, feeling an even deeper sense of responsibility. This was why he built Golden Brew, to create opportunities, to set a standard, and to inspire others to do the same. It wasn't just about serving coffee, it was about creating spaces where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. The story of his undercover visit continued to be shared, not just as a moment of corporate accountability, but as a lesson in leadership. Colleges and business schools used it as a case study on ethics and management. Other CEOs reached out, acknowledging that Lewis had set an example for what true leadership looked like. Even Karen's firing, though controversial to some, served as a reminder that actions have consequences. Some saw it as harsh, but many agreed that businesses have a duty to uphold their values, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. For Lewis, it wasn't about punishing one person, it was about ensuring that no customer or employee would ever feel unwelcome in his stores again. A year later, as Golden Brew expanded into new cities, Lewis made sure that the lessons from this experience were never forgotten. Every new hire went through comprehensive training, and managers were expected to lead with integrity. Employee engagement soared, and customer trust was stronger than ever. As Lewis sat in his office, looking out over the skyline, he knew that his work was far from over. But in that moment, he felt pride, not just in what he had built, but in the change he had set in motion. Because true leadership isn't just about building a business, it's about leaving a legacy that lasts. True leadership isn't just about running a successful business, it's about ensuring that the values we claim to uphold are reflected in our daily actions. Lewis Thompson's story reminds us that leadership requires accountability, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. One of the most important lessons here is that turning a blind eye to injustice only allows it to persist. Had Lewis ignored the discrimination happening in his store, it would have continued unchecked, affecting countless customers and employees. Instead, he took action, not out of anger, but out of a commitment to fairness. This story also teaches us that true change starts at the top. A leader's job isn't just to set rules, but to create an environment where respect and inclusivity are non-negotiable. By implementing company-wide training and holding employees accountable, Lewis didn't just fix one store, he changed an entire company culture. Finally, this reminds us that small actions can have a big impact. Standing up for what's right, even in seemingly small moments, can create ripples of change. Whether in a business, a community, or everyday life, doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, is always worth it.